Hello, everybody, and welcome to some Air Tycoon Online. It is actually 3 a.m. right now, so if I say and do some stupid things, don't be surprised. But with that in mind, as you can see here, my upticks are starting to look pretty good. Um, Upticks are about 500,000, downticks are about 250,000, so we're not doing too bad in terms of profit. Now, at the end of the day, this still is not great. Um, my leaderboard position is still quite far down. As you can see, we're 8th place. And I have started to luckily start to steadily climb along with a lot of my allies. And as you can see, we make the majority of the top 10, but we're a long way off the top couple spots. Now, we want to eventually end up higher up on the leaderboard. My goal would be 3rd for this world, but that's also aiming quite high as my fleet and that kind of stuff is 290 aircraft. It's starting to grow substantially. I'm probably adding good 20, 30 aircraft to that per day. Eventually, right, I want to climb up this. So I'm going to need more hubs is one thing I've realized. And Simon kindly suggested Toronto as a hub, and it looks fantastic to me. Look at the to Asia. It's virtually untaken, even to Europe. It's only very lightly been taken. And from another thing I wanted to do is basically, I think I wanted to make Beijing another one of my hubs. It's been taken decently to Europe, but also quite lightly and very, very lightly to North America. So those are the two hubs I've started to invest in now. As you know, I've started to lighten up on my investing, simply due to the fact that investing is very expensive. Um, and you know my airline was not really growing as fast as it probably should have been, so instead of continuing to heavily invest, I've kind of eased off on the investment a little bit, and now I'm focusing on growth speed because investing for the future is really nice, of course, because as you move into the future, you're going to find it really nice that you have had a lot of investment done. You're going to find it's easier to grow, it's easier to get a lot of uh, big routes making tons of money each. You're going to find it a lot easier to get these kind of routes because you're going to have such high name value that anybody competing with you on bigger routes isn't going to compete with you very well. So that's why it's a huge advantage to have really high route image, and why I would always recommend focusing on having high route image. Not route image, what am I talking about? Name value and service value. Yeah, sorry, I was confused with another game I play. Um, yeah. What I was actually trying to talk about is having high service investment level. Where is it? Um, yeah, this customer service level is very important, and having very high name value in your hub cities is also really important. So as you can see, I'm investing quite heavily in all my hub cities, um, and quite heavily in the cities I intend to make into hubs too. And once again, the whole point of that is just to really focus on, when the future rolls around, we're going to have no problems whatsoever expanding quickly, um, and expanding a lot. So, yeah, with that in mind, I'm looking like I need some stopover destinations over on this side of Shanghai, but I think I could do something like this to Denpasar our 4 schedules per week. And of course, this route could be flown with a much larger aircraft, but I only have DC-10s right now. So I'll just open these routes with DC-10s, and maybe when I am able to afford more 747s, because at the end of the day, guys, 747s are still very expensive aircraft. They're very good aircraft, but you can't run around with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 747s this early into the game unless you've had a really good start. Um, and I haven't really had that thanks to not being completely active, and not playing the ideal strategy of using um, smaller planes to allow many leases of larger planes, which is the best strategy at the end of the day still. Um, and of course, I did not do that, just due to real life time constraints. But anyways, with that in mind, looks like my good routes to Shanghai, like there's still plenty. Geez, look at this. Shanghai to Dusseldorf direct. We might as well just open that because we don't have enough slots for anything else. But yeah, as you can see across my hubs, It's not really the lack of good routes which is preventing me from expanding right now. It's still almost exclusively the lack of me playing and actively making routes with um, slots and such and such, which is really bottlenecking me. And just the amount of money I have to work with is not really being high enough. Um, yeah, the main issue with my money, of course, is just the fact that I didn't have a strong early game. It kind of means that right now I don't have a good amount of money. Um, and yeah, at the end of the day, it's not really such a big deal. I mean, I'm gonna live on. I'm gonna keep playing, and I'm gonna keep growing. And at the end of the day, it hasn't even been 20 years yet. I mean, normally at this time, I've only been in the world for 11, 12 years since I like to join as close to 1969 as possible, which is when my favorite plane, the 747, releases. Um, so yeah, like I usually haven't even been in a world long at all at this point in the world. And I guess anything that's not that, I'm already doing better than I'm normally doing. You know what I'm saying? At this point, actually, at this point, I've usually climbed all the way to the point where um, I've usually climbed quite high up the leaderboard by this point. Normally, actually, but of course that's not the case this time. So we're gonna just take things easy and see how high we get. Um, at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, my goal is still third place. And if I can do that by only adding 30, 40 aircraft per day, I'll happily do so. Um, 30, 40 aircraft adding a day is quite light on a time commitment. I would say that would take about an hour of playing it a day, especially if you play off camera where you don't have to talk over it and you're just thinking about the game. And for me, at least, I can move way faster when I'm doing that. Like, I can probably open 10 routes in a matter of minutes when I'm playing just on my own without recording. Like 10 routes, I could probably open in about 2 minutes. I'd request all the slots at my main airports, or I'll just scan around the world quickly for some routes I want to eventually open, and then request the slots in those cities. It really does not take very much time at all. So yeah, because of that, um, I'm starting to add a considerable amount of routes off camera too, and you guys obviously don't see it, but I am doing so. So um, yeah, that's also been improvement to my playing, I guess. Uh, So I should start to climb up the leaderboard soon. You should. I hope so at least. Seventh place looks like a pretty easy grab, and we should steadily see some climbing above that too. As you can see right now, I'm also ordering 747 SPs. Now, I've mentioned before in the past that 747 SPs are not the best aircraft, but I also haven't mentioned that they're strong suits. Um, one of the strong suits of the 747 SP is some of the highest base satisfaction in the whole game. That is never really a bad thing. Um, it's extremely long range, and it's middle sized, so it's bigger than a DC 1030. It's smaller than a 747, so it's on the bigger end of the middle of like large aircrafts. So it has that. But yeah, I mean, I think it definitely has its place. And as the 747-200 and other really large aircraft are starting to lose their high satisfaction edge, um, I think the 747 SP will kind of replace it as the high satisfaction aircraft. And the really, really big routes, which would be like, yep, I'm going to fly a 747 on that route, no problem whatsoever. Those are starting to become fewer and fewer, and far in between. And that means once again that the 747 SP gets better because it's the correct size for less insanely large operations. So yeah, with that in mind, like as you can see, my uptick downtake is starting to fluctuate quite a bit, um, from 500,000, which I think is a pretty good score for this time, to 250,000, which really feels quite bad. So um, yeah, the reason why it fluctuates is simply because the aircraft I'm using are a little bit too big for some of the routes, and I also do have a little bit of competition on a lot of my routes. Now, I normally avoid competition, but I'm not doing it this round simply because I want to more easily make a ton of routes. And I don't really want to think so much about which routes I make, which is why I just compete if there's a competitor. I kind of just don't even, sometimes I don't even look at their route before I make it if I like the route, and I kind of just assume that the route they're trying to make is not too big or like not too small for the kind of aircraft I'm trying to use. It's not a great thing to assume, but if you're trying to move fast and you really don't feel like making the most out of every single aircraft, because honestly, if you use better aircraft and have good satisfaction, like I have been doing, this is the benefit you get from having a slow start. Um, is once your start gets rolling and these numbers start piling up, so your name value, your satisfaction, and all that kind of stuff really starts to pile up and get high. Is the benefit you get to reap is you get to open competition rounds without much thinking, because even though they're still less ideal than monopolies overall, um, the amount they're less ideal than monopolies by becomes smaller. I can fly on a ton of routes with competition and make money as if they're not competitive at all, assuming the route is at least of a certain baseline size. And that baseline size gets smaller and smaller and smaller the higher satisfaction you have relative to your competitors. Let's take a look at most of my competitive routes. Most of them are full all the time. And that's because I have really high satisfaction, um, or the route is just big enough to support two players flying their aircraft on really big routes. Like, take a look at these 747s. I mean, four companies, and I mean, they're all 100% load factor except for the 707 right now. But I'm sure, like, I'm charging the highest price and still receiving good load factors. Obviously, the downticks still don't look great, but um, sometimes they can't be avoided. And it's not bad considering I'm the only one who hasn't micromanaged my prices. Um, Everybody else has changed the prices to make sure that um, they're lower and that kind of such thing, and I haven't. And I'm, my plane is still full, so I'm not really losing very much from it. Besides on the downtakes, I'm only losing a little bit. Phoenix to London. I mean, this is a route where I'm guessing my competition is barely even considered competition. So yes, of course, that's going to be a good route. Um, let's take a look at some of these other routes here. I mean, this one just has no competition. I mean, these routes with this player competition, it really doesn't feel like competition at all, and it is a little bit unfortunate that I can't get a plane even bigger than a 747 for a lot of these routes. But I mean, the 747 is already strong enough. And let's check these routes to see if they're code shareable. And nope. Once again, I don't want to code share any full routes. The point of code sharing in general, right, is not to code share a full route, but to benefit by getting the bonus load factor you get from a code share. That's the entire purpose of code sharing, actually, is just to boost your load factors. So if the route is already full, guys, don't request a code share from me. I won't accept it. If it is, I will accept it, um, even though it's basically charity, right? If you don't code share me any routes and I code share you routes, I'm basically giving you profit, but I don't mind. Um, as you guys are allies, and I am kind of strong arming in my hubs and taking routes regardless of whether or not there's an ally competitor or not, and that's just because, um, once again, I was going to start play with a really few number of hubs at the beginning, and I kind of decided now that I probably need more hubs now that I'm really starting to look like I'm going to climb up the leaderboards, so that means I'm going to need more hubs. And one thing I do really want to do is I want to go interfere with this guy. He likes to fly multiple 747s on one schedule. Now, he does use 747s, which means he has great name value or great satisfaction, but I think I could still do some damage. Um, the reason being is, despite the fact that he's flying these nice aircraft, his name value is only 70 in his home base. Mine's like 90 in London already. So if I start investing in Chicago now, which is his main cash cow hub for the number one player, I could do some damage. But there's also another thing I could do, which is ignore him completely and try and expand on my own and play for second or third place, which is where I would instead focus on hubs like Shanghai and Toronto and take all these juicy, juicy, beautiful monopoly routes, take them with nice aircraft, and make a ton of money that way. Another thing I have to do is I have to set up plane replacements now because my earlier planes are going to need to be replaced by tomorrow. So what we need to do here is, let me see if I can find it. So you set auto plane replace. So say target plane lifespan, um, new plane lifespan. We want newer planes to be replacing the old ones, and the target planes are ones with 0 lifespan. We want to turn auto change on, and you want to put the plus minus plane size to the maximum possible. This will allow the game to replace aircraft with a 50% difference in size. So it'll be able to place DC-8s with like um, DC-10s, for example. It'll be able to replace that, but it won't be able to replace a DC-8 with a 747 because it's more than twice as big um, as a DC-8. So this is how kind of the plane auto change works. Um, it works quite well. Sometimes it just doesn't work at all, and I have no idea why. But other times, I don't even have to think about it. I just order the planes and come back, and the planes have been replaced. And one of the most tedious parts of the game has been automated, which is really, really, really nice. So all you really have to do is come on and choose which planes to order to replace your old ones and make sure they're in the right size classification. Anyways, with that in mind, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode. I'm going to try and keep bringing one episode per day, that kind of thing. Um, as the number of routes and whatever I get higher and higher and higher, I'm gonna start recording less and less of a percentage of what I'm doing in this company because I want eventually to have 1,000 planes. I think 1,000 planes is the Goldilocks plane amount where you don't have to play all day to maintain the company. But if you use 100 very large planes, you can get really, really profitable as well. Um, or 1,000 very large planes. So, I mean, my plans would be mostly 747s and A380s. And then with the smaller end of my planes being like 777s, MD-11s, and A330s. So those would be the kind of size of planes I would be looking to use. I don't, maybe I'll use A310s, A310 300s for direct flights. Because for direct flights, they're one of the nicest planes available. And of course, in a lot of your hubs, you'll eventually run out of possible ways to make stopovers. That's just what happens. And you have to fly directly. I think it's a beautiful plane for flying direct. Um, in fact, I'll talk about this maybe later in another episode, but that was Airbus's original point to point aircraft, the A310 300. And nobody bought it because it came before its era. And generationally speaking, it was like the Dreamliner. For a point to point plane, it was, um, and what I mean by like the Dreamliner, it was as much more efficient as other aircraft of its size category at the time, per seat at least, and per kilometer, so that it would have been like the equivalent of the 787 of the era, but it just came too early for airlines to adapt to point flying. Anyways, with that in mind, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.